G'day everyone, let me show you how to blend images to create better composites in Photoshop. My name is Hoy, and in this video we'll go through the different components of color in Photoshop that we need to adjust and use a number of check layers to help match our images to the background to create a more cohesive picture. If you want to follow along, you can use the exact images that I'm using. The links are in the description. Okay, so to get started, let's open the images that we'll be using by going to File, Open, navigate to the folder where you've got your image saved under, select both images and press Open. The two images that we'll be using is this model layer here, as well as this background. Now what we need to do is bring one image into the other. So I'm going to bring the model layer into this image here. So let's go to that window here. I'm going to click and drag, and then just put it into this image here. So before we do anything, let's rename this layer so we can keep track of it later. So let's double click on this and type something like model and press return on our keyboard. And we want to make a smart object out of this. And what a smart object is basically a wrapper that protects your original image. So when you resize it up or down, it maintains the quality of your original image. So let's right click on an empty area here and select Convert to Smart Object. You know that is a smart object here by this icon here. I'm going to press Command T on my keyboard to bring out my transform controls. And you can see that the transform controls are way bigger than what the screen can show. So let's fit it to screen by pressing Command 0 on our keyboard. And let's resize it by dragging this corner here. I'm going to press Shift to constrain the proportion as I resize. And I'm also going to press Option to scale it from this anchor point here. So something like this will do. And I'm going to just place it here. I'm going to press return on my keyboard. Let's fit it to screen again because at the moment it's way too small. Pressing Command 0 on our keyboard. Now that we can see it a bit better, the image of the model is slightly too small. So I'm going to press Command T on my keyboard again just to bring out the transform controls again. And do the same thing by pressing Shift and then just dragging it out to the size that I want. So something like this. I can commit that change either by pressing return on my keyboard or clicking on this check mark here. Let's just move this to the side here. Now the next thing that we need to do is to cut the model out from the background, and we can do that by masking it. Now there are lots of ways to mask it out. This isn't a masking tutorial, so I do have other masking tutorials and you can find out the links in the description below. So we'll just use an automatic tool for this tutorial called Select Subject. So let's go to Select and go to Subject. You know that it's made a selection by these marching ants here. The next thing to do is to make a mask out of this. So just click on this mask icon here. Now the mask isn't perfect. If I zoom in by pressing Option on my keyboard and scroll wheel mouse up, it's done a pretty decent job, but it's not 100% perfect. And again, this isn't a masking tutorial. If you do want to know how to mask it a bit better, check out the links in the description. I'm going to press Command 0 to fit it to screen again. And before we make further changes, let's just understand a little bit about how Photoshop processes color. So I'm going to click on this to bring out the color picker tool here. And this is what we're interested in, the hue, saturation, brightness controls. Now we need to adjust these three components of the model layer to that of the background. So let's just go through what each is one by one. So the hue or the H is simply what color it is. So if I select this red here, you can see that the hue is red with 100% saturation, 100% brightness. So hue is simply the color. And I can adjust the color by moving the slider up or down. Now the next component that we need to be mindful about is the saturation. Saturation is simply how much color it is how intense the color is. So at the moment, we've got a saturation of 100, so the color is fully saturated. If I move this stop to the left, it's got less saturation, so the amount of color is low or lower. The next component that we need to adjust is the brightness. The brightness is simply how bright or dark the color is. So at the moment, it's 100% bright. If I go down on this color picker, it will become darker and darker. So these are the three components that we need to adjust for the model layer to match it with the background layer. So I'm going to cancel out of that. So let's begin our adjustment by adjusting the brightness levels. Let's go to our adjustment layer icon here. Let's select solid color, and we'll use a hex code of 808080, and this will give us a 50% gray layer. You can also do that by setting the hue to 0, saturation to 0, and 50% brightness. Let's press OK here and change the blend mode from normal to color. And this will give us a grayscale representation of the images. Now you're probably wondering, well, why didn't we simply just create a black and white layer on top of it? And the reason is because this method provides a better representation of the saturation in this image. Now let's rename this layer to luminosity check so we can keep track of what we're doing. Press return on our keyboard, and this is simply a check layer. It doesn't really do anything, simply just to allow us to see it in black and white. What we need to do is add an adjustment layer where we add the adjustments to the model layer. Now to do that, let's create a curves adjustment layer by going to this adjustment layer icon here and selecting curves. What I want to do is to figure out the black point and the white point of the background image, and then do the same for the model layer. So I'm going to switch off my model layer here and then drag this curves adjustment layer beneath the model layer, so the curves adjustment layer only applies to the background image. I'm going to go up to my curves here. So with Option pressed on my keyboard, I'm going to slide this tab from the left to the right, and you can see that the image on the left has changed to black and white. And the areas that are turning up black first is the areas that are the darkest point here. So somewhere here are the darkest point. So I'm going to select my eyedropper tool here, or you can press I on your keyboard. I'm going to press Shift as well to bring up the sampling ring, and I'm going to press once here. And this will make a mark here, so I don't forget where the darkest point is. I'm just going to reset this back to the default. Now, before I do the same thing for the white point, I'm just going to turn off my gray layer here. I'm going to avoid these specular highlights here, and probably also here. And the reason why I want to avoid that is if I zoom in, the specular highlights are pretty much blown out areas where there's no detail. And if I apply that white point to the model layer, the white points on the model layer will be blown out as well. So I want to avoid that. And I want to see what the white points are other than these areas here. So with Option on my keyboard pressed, I'm going to click and drag from right to left, and then just see which white points come out first, apart from the areas where there's specular highlights. So on the extreme left here, looks like a place where I can select the white point. So with my eyedropper tool selected, I'm going to press Shift on my keyboard to bring the sampling ring back out, and press once here. Now the info panel here has shown up. I've ignored it when it came up the first time, but I will come back to it to explain what we're going to do with it. So I'm going to close it again. So what we've got here is basically the dark point and the white points on the background image. So now what we need to do is do the same thing for the model layer. I'm going to move the curves layer up here. And you can see that by placing the curves adjustment layer on top of the background and the model layer, it's affected both layers. However, we only want to affect the model layer. The traditional way, or the most popular way of only affecting the layer below it, is to clip the curved layer to the model layer simply by pressing Command Option G on the keyboard. And you can see that there is a down arrow here indicating that it's only affecting this layer here. So if I change it, if I turn on the visibility of the model layer, and if I make any adjustment, only the model layer is changing. But because we're making a few adjustment layers, there'll be a lot of clipping, and it makes the whole layer panels very, very messy. So I'm going to use a different method. So I'm going to unclip that layer, and with the curves layer selected, I'm going to press Shift and select my model layer. I'm going to group it by pressing this icon here, or you can press Command G on the keyboard. I'm going to rename this by double clicking on it and typing something like model adjustments, pressing return on my keyboard to accept the change. And let's open this, and you'll see that at the moment it will still affect both layers, right? Now the reason for that is that the blend mode of this group is pass through. It means that whatever you do in this group will pass through to the background layer as well, outside of this folder. So what we need to do is to change the blend mode from pass through to normal. And you can see if I just click on this curves adjustment icon here, that it only now affects the model layer. Let's reset this curve all the way to 0. And before we forget, I should have actually renamed this from the generic curves one to say luminosity adjustment. Whoops, can't spell. Luminosity adjust. And this is what we're actually going to be adjusting. Now remember, we need to find the black and white points of the model layer. So with Option on my keyboard, I'm going to slide this from the left to the right, and notice that the hair is the area that first turns up as black. So do it again. So with my eyedropper tool selected, if you don't have it selected, press I on your keyboard, and I'm going to press Shift and then just press once here just to make a note of that. And I'm going to reset that black point all the way to the left and do the same with my white point. So press Option on your keyboard and then just go from right to left, and you can see that her cheongsam, which is the traditional Vietnamese garment, has turned white. So do it again. It's something like this. So eyedropper tool, Shift and click. So now we've found the black and white points of both the background and the model layer. So now the question is, well, what do we do with these? So I've got my info panel automatically shown here. If you don't have your info panel or you can't see it, go to Window and make sure that info is selected. Now remember, the first point was the dark point. We're going to click this little down arrow here and just set it to grayscale. We're only interested in grayscale, and do that for the second, third, and fourth points. I forgot to turn on the luminosity check layer, so let's just turn that on. And you'll notice that there are figures here. So for the first black point on the background, there's 92%, whereas our black point on the model is 95%. So it's there or thereabouts. If you want to change it, you can adjust it by going to your curves adjustment and just sliding it up to make it lighter. If you're working on another image, you can go darker by going across here. But I don't want to go across, I just want to make it lighter, something like this. It doesn't need to be perfect 92 because this is an art, not a science. There or thereabouts will be fine. Now let's do the same thing for the white points. You can see that the white point for the background layer is 20%. However, ours at the moment is 0%, but if I go reset it to all the way to the right, it's 14%. Still a lot brighter than the background. So to match it to the background, just going to dim it down to about 20% here. So what we're doing is sort of matching the black of the model layer to that of the background, and similarly to the white as well. Now let's see what we've done. I'm going to close that and just turn off the luminosity check layer, and this is before the change and this is after. You can see that with this small change, it has already made the model blend in a little bit better. Again, before, after. Now before we go on to changing the next component, which is the hue. So you're probably screaming out to me, how do I remove these sampling rings? Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. There are two ways to remove it. One is individually and the other one is just a blanket removal. So to remove it individually, just hover over one of the sampling rings, press Option Shift, and your icon will turn into this scissors here. And once it does, just click once here, whoops, and then it will disappear. The other way is to remove it in a blanket way. So just go to your eyedropper tool here and click and hold and select your color sampler tool and just press clear all. Isn't that much better? I'm going to close this again. Now before we move on to the next adjustment, let's just make sure that our blend mode for this luminosity adjustment layer is set not to normal but to luminosity, because it's the luminance of this layer that we want to see only. So the next thing that we need to adjust is the hue or the color of the model layer. So to do that, let's go to the adjustment layer icon here, go up to solid color, and we'll make a 50% gray layer here by pressing 808080. Alternatively, you can set the hue to 0, saturation to 0, and brightness of 50%. Let's press OK. Let's just move this adjustment layer out of the model adjustment folder here. Let's rename this so we can keep track of this by typing something like hue check. Press enter, and let's set the blend mode from normal to luminosity. And what this shows is the color of the image here. You can see that the background has got a lot of orange and blues and purples and magenta, whereas where the model is, it sort of sticks out. It doesn't really blend in with the background. So our job is to make the model blend in with the background. To do that, let's click on this curves adjustment here, because we want to make another curves adjustment layer on top of that by going to this here and pressing curves. Let's rename this by double clicking on it and go to hue adjust. Now to see the adjustment a little bit better, let's go back to our hue check layer. You can double click on this icon here and just bring this point down a little bit to make it darker, and then press OK. Let's go back to our curves adjustment layer for our hue adjust layer here. And what we want to do is to adjust each channel individually to blend the model in. So I'm going to go to my curves here. I'm going to select my red, green, and blue and adjust it that way. Let's go to our on image adjustment tool by clicking on this little hand here. I'm going to click and drag all the way up, all the way down, just to get a sense of the range of colors that I'm dealing with. And then once I've got a sense, I can sort of just move it up and down to a color that blends in. So something like this will do. And I'm going to select another point and then go up or down. If I go up, I get more red. If I go down, I get less and get the complementary color of red, which is cyan. So let's just see what we're dealing with by going up and down a bit. And something like this looks fine. And maybe the hair as well. What you want to do is select the major parts of an image. So arbitrarily, I've decided the face, the clothes, and the hair are sort of the major parts. We'll be making a few passes with each channel, so you don't need to get it accurate for each channel on the first pass. So something like this will look fine. Let's go to our green channel here, and let's do the same. So let's just see what we're dealing with first, and then just slow it down a bit, something like this for a face, and then do the same for the cheongsam or the traditional garment. Now, if I go up for the green channel, it's got more green. Go down, it's got the complementary color of magenta. So something like this looks okay. And let's do the same for the hair. Let's go to the blue channel and let's do the same thing. If I go up, I get more blue. If I go down, I get the complementary color, which is yellow. So we can always go back to our channels if we don't like it. This got a little bit of green, more green than I want. So I'm just going to select and go down a little to bring a little bit more of the complementary color, which is magenta. And then go to red, maybe increase the red a little bit more and do the same. So as I say, the first pass doesn't need to be perfect. We can make continued adjustments. So just by looking at this layer here, we can see that already the model is blending in a lot better than the original image that we have. So if I turn off the hue check layer, this is what we had before and this is after. So already, without even looking at the colored image, we know that it's blending in a little bit better. So if I turn off the check layer here, we can see that this is what we've changed it to. So before, after, before, after. Now you can see that the model layer has been blown out a bit. Let's change our blend mode from normal to color, because it's the color is what we're interested in this layer here. So if you still want to make any adjustments after this, you don't need to use the hue check layer. You can simply use the on image adjustment tool and then just keep doing it like so. So I'm going to just undo that, and perhaps her hair needs a little bit less red. So I'm just going to bring that down a little bit, and I'm going to go to our green channel here and just bring down the magenta a little bit by putting some more green, so pressing up on my keyboard here. So this is before the color adjustment and this is after. Now you can see that the saturation of the model layer is a little bit too much. So the next thing that we need to do is to adjust the saturation. To do that, let's create a adjustment layer by going to selective color. And let's just bring this selective color adjustment outside of the folder here. And let's rename this by typing something like saturation check. Press enter. And just to tidy up, let's group all this by making sure that the top layer is selected, pressing shift on your keyboard and clicking on luminosity and pressing Command G on our keyboard, and rename this folder to check layers. And just to make it stand out a little bit more, I'm going to right click on this empty layer and then just select red. And this will make this area here red. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any functionality. All it does is just to signify that this is something different. So I'm going to open that back up. I'm going to select my selective color adjustment. And what we need to do is to create a saturation map out of this. So make sure that you've got absolute selected here. And let's just open this option here. And for all our colors from red to magentas, what we're going to do is slide the black slider all the way to the left. On the tones, on the white, neutrals and blacks, what we're going to do is move it all the way to 100% black. And you can see that the image has drastically changed, right? Before you moved on, you probably think that's a very tedious process. So once you've made that, you can create a preset so you don't have to do it every single time. So to do that, let's press on this hamburger menu here and you can select Save Selective Color Preset. It will ask you where you want to save and type in your file name and then press save. You can see that I've already got one here. It's grayed out here. I'm not going to save that. So the next time you make a selective color adjustment layer, you can load it by going back to the hamburger menu here and go to Load Selective Color Preset, locate your file, press it, and press Open. So now that we've got our saturation map, let's create a hue saturation adjustment layer. Let's click on this curves adjustment, which is in the model adjustment folder, because we want to create a hue saturation layer on top of this. Go to your adjustment layer icon and select hue saturation. So what we need to do now is just to match the white and black point of the model layer to the background layer. Now you can do this individually through each of these channels here, but I like using the simple method by using the on image adjustment tool by clicking on this tool here and then just going back to the image and just sliding it back and forth. So remember, the lighter it is, the more saturated it is. The darker it is, the less saturated it is. I'm just going to play around with the switch here, something like this. So you notice when we use the on image adjustment tool, it automatically selects the channels. So when you go back into this layer here, so if I select out of it and go back into the hue saturation layer here, that you might freak out and go, wow, where did my saturation adjustment go? It's set back to 0. You notice that it's showing master here, which is basically all the channels combined here. So what you need to do, if you ever click out of it and then click back into it, you need to go back to the channel that was used, and then that's where you'll see your adjustments here. I remember the first time I learned about the hue saturation adjustment layer, I made all these changes, and then when I went back into it, I had a heart attack because I couldn't find where all the settings I did was. So I was like, man, I have to do it all over again. So I'm just shouting that out just in case you are in the same position that I was in. So let's see what we've done here by turning off the check layer here, and let's turn the check layer off and on. You can see that the change is subtle, and you can always adjust it again using these sliders here. Now, if you want the dress, for example, to be a little bit more saturated than her face, we can do that by using another hue saturation adjustment layer. So say we want the cheongsam to be more saturated. Let's just bump that up a bit just to absorb a little bit more of the reddish hue there. But you can see that the face and the hair is probably a little bit more saturated. Let's create another hue saturation adjustment layer. But before we do that, I noticed I did something very naughty, which is I didn't name my layers. So I'm going to double click on that, saturation adjust. And I'm going to put 1 here for the first one. Let's create another layer here. Click on this and go hue saturation. Now let's not forget to rename it by double clicking on this. So saturation adjust, let's say face and hair, so we don't get confused, and press return on our keyboard. G'day everyone, it's Hoi from the editing suite in the future, noticing that I should have also changed the blend mode of both saturation adjustment layers from normal to saturation, because that's the only thing that we want to see from these layers. So let's make sure that our saturation adjustment layer is selected. Go to normal and select saturation. Make sure that your other saturation adjustment layer is selected, and then let's change the blend mode to saturation now. Now that the blend mode for both saturation adjustment layers is set to saturation, everything in the world is right again. Let's get back to normal programming. Now I can go back up to our on image adjustment icon here and reduce the saturation of the face, of her hair. I'm not worried about the saturation of anywhere else because I'm going to mask that out. Once I'm happy with the saturation levels of her face and her hair, let's click on this mask icon and press Command I to hide all the adjustment. And we're going to paint back in the adjustment that we've just made. So let's go to our brush tool, or we can press B on our keyboard to invoke the brush tool. Make sure that our foreground color is white. If it's not white, you can reset it by pressing D on our keyboard to set it back to default. And I'm just going to paint that white to reveal the effect that we just made, which is less saturation. And this is before, after, before, after. The effect is very subtle, and this is the key to making realistic composites. You don't want a big overall adjustment, you want little incremental adjustments. Now the model's cheongsam is probably a little bit too saturated for my liking, so I'm just going to change that a little bit again But the point is, what looks good to me might not look good to you, and vice versa. These are all adjustable. And that's how you blend an image to the background to create better composites in Photoshop. Let's just review what we've done here. So I'm going to turn off everything. So the check layers off. I'm going to go back to our original image. We've got two images here. One is the background and the other one is the model. We brought the model layer into the background image here and then made a mask out of it by going to select subject, and then we adjusted the luminance of the model layer and then adjusted the hue or the color of the model and then the saturation. Because we wanted different levels of saturation on the model, we created another hue and saturation adjustment layer, and then which only affected the hair and the face. I hope you found this useful. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite technique was or what you would like to see in future videos. And as a small YouTuber who's just started out, I do everything from scratch, from coming up with the idea for the tutorial, creating the thumbnails and captions, which all takes time. So if you've enjoyed this video or learned a thing or two, it would help me out so much if you can like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can get notified for when the next video is out.